Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, I'm Susan Kaufman for Attitude Magazine, and today we are talking about mindfulness. This is a topic that's extremely important to all of us with impulsive behavior, who blurt things out and wish we didn't, and would love to be sort of more aware of what's going on with ourselves and with our bodies. We're very, very fortunate today to have with us Dr. Lidia Zylowska, who's a board-certified psychiatrist, an expert in adult ADHD and mindfulness-based therapy. She has a long list of credentials, a graduate of UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute and co-founder of the UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. She is the author of The Mindfulness Prescription for Adult ADHD, which I recommend to you. And she has a couple of websites, which I'd like to point out, www.lidiazylowska.com. Also, take a look at the Facebook page, facebook.com/mindfulnessadhd, where there's a community where people are discussing this topic, helping one another implement meditation-based self-regulation techniques. So, Dr. Zylowska, thank you so much. And over to you, Dr. Zylowska.
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all of you for joining us. Mindfulness has been popping up everywhere if you've been looking at some of the journal articles and pop media. So I'm excited to talk to you about how to implement it for ADHD and how to make it really user-friendly for those who may have difficulty sitting still and paying attention, which is most people with ADHD. As many of you know, probably from reading Attitudes Magazine, ADHD is very much about self-regulation difficulty. And that's a big word. Self-regulation is a long word, but it's about difficulty directing attention, directing and modulating emotions, and also having a say in what happens throughout your day, so controlling your actions. And that's often compromised with ADHD, can lead to problems with distraction, reactivity, impulsivity, and not performing the way you would like to. And living with ADHD, living with these symptoms can make one vulnerable to stress, negative emotions, and self-doubt. And then it could be this kind of vicious cycle in a sense that once you're stressed, once you feel badly about yourself, it can really zap your ability to attend. It can zap your motivation. It can be difficult to get out of a rut. In terms of treating this condition, we typically look towards medications or other external supports. Medications like stimulants are often used. External supports like having a calendar, to-do list, working with a therapist or a coach can be quite helpful. Or even having another person, a spouse or a friend that can be a motivating factor. Those things can be extremely helpful. But mindfulness is a novel approach in a sense that it's a tool that can develop the inner resources, the inner skills for self-regulation. And although this webinar was titled Alternative Therapies, I do want to emphasize that mindfulness is very much a complementary tool. It can be used together with medications or coaching. It can also be used by itself to minimize dependence on medications, or if somebody has more mild symptoms, they often can use medications as needed or use mindfulness as an alternative. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is a meditation-based brain training, as all meditation approaches are. They really are active and working with the attention and brain. So it's a mental training or brain training that can strengthen attention, develop self-awareness, regulate emotions, help us with our reactivity to things, and overall reduce stress. And meditation is a loaded word. If we can just go back to the last slide, I want to spend a little bit more time on that. Meditation can be a loaded word for a lot of people. They think it has to be a certain lifestyle that you adapt, or that it's in a context of spirituality. And many meditation approaches did derive from different traditions. Many Eastern traditions or spiritual traditions in general have meditation type practices. But in the last couple of decades, meditation has been used in clinical setting to help strengthen one's ability to self-observe, to train attention, and to develop different relationship to experiences that are stressful. Some of you might have heard of mindfulness-based stress reduction program, or MBSR. That's a very popular way of learning mindfulness, and that's a program that is often used as a template to adapt mindfulness training to other conditions. Adapting mindfulness for depression, for example, for eating disorders, and also my work was to adapt that kind of training for ADHD. So mindfulness practice is a specific type of meditation tradition, but it's very user-friendly because it's versatile and flexible, and one can be creative in how you're applying it to your life. When you take a mindfulness course or a class, typically there are formal silent meditation practices, but in addition, there's also informal practices. And informal practice is becoming aware during daily activities of how you're doing, being aware of the present moment, no matter what you're doing, where you're at, so anytime, anywhere. And those instances of awareness can be very brief, but if repeated throughout the day, they can be very powerful in training this skill. And I find that the informal practice, or the shorter practices, or shorter formal practices, are very helpful for those with ADHD who often have trouble sitting still for prolonged periods of time, or the restlessness makes it very uncomfortable to do that. So incorporating shorter practices, incorporating some movement, and also, just turning on the mindfulness mind state in the middle of whether it's working or talking to someone, or interacting with your children can be a wonderful practice. So even as you're sitting right now, becoming more aware of your body sitting, or sensations of that you may feel at your feet as they're resting on the ground, or wherever they are, or how you're sitting, noticing your body posture. That's a moment of bringing attention to the present moment in a different way, which we usually don't do. That's not typically what we do. We're typically thinking, we're sort of in the cloud of thinking. So we're planning, there's lots of maybe ideas and thoughts going on, and some of it is reacting to what's just happened. So our default, our sort of automatic pilot mode, is to be thinking, to be reacting. And so mindfulness is inviting us to remove our attention to that busyness of thinking and bring it to what may be happening in the present moment. And there's lots of things in the present moment that one can pay attention to. But the initial practices are very much focused on paying attention to sensory inputs. So paying attention to sounds, to taste, to smells. And so mindful eating is often an initial practice of learning how to slow down a little bit and just immerse yourself in the sensations, or the textures, or the experience of just eating and tasting food. And this may seem like a very simple practice, and may seem a little surprising that it may help with ADHD, but what you're doing in that simple practice is you're taking attention away from where it usually is, things it's maybe usually distracted by, and try to direct it, and oftentimes, direct it and redirect it and keep coming back if it's hard to stay with just, with the practice of, for example, just eating. So in that simple movement, you're training attention, you're training awareness of where your attention is going, and learning to be more connected through your senses to the present moment. There are other practices like that. For example, the very basic practice of focusing on the breath. Again, it's learning to move attention away to the breathing and stay with the breathing, which is often very hard. Most of the time when you do that, you notice how quickly attention goes away from the breathing to something else. So it's returning to the breath over and over again. That's as if training the attention muscle. So practices are, just as we have physical training that rely on repetition, the meditation practices are mental training that relies on repetition to strengthen certain qualities. And again, that can be done in a formal or informal practice. So in this next slide that we'll see on the screen right now, I wanted to emphasize that mindfulness practice can be used to decrease stress. And that's a very quick way of starting to implement mindfulness in one's life. As some of you may know, we talk about this idea of self-regulation tank in ADHD. Dr. Barkley, one of the ADHD experts, often talks about it, that self-regulation capacity is a limited resource. It's like a tank that can be used up as you go throughout your day. So every time we have to self-regulate, maybe observe how we're doing, withhold saying something, you may be angry but not reacting out of anger. That's using the self-control muscle, the self-regulation skill. And if you keep using it repeatedly throughout the day, that depletes it. So oftentimes it's harder at the end of the day when we're tired to self-regulate. Other things like being really stressed and anxious, maybe stressed by not having enough sleep or not eating enough, all those things can further diminish our self-regulation tank. So we have to really look for ways to replenish that tank or to strengthen this ability. And meditation practice can be very helpful because it's a proactive way of counteracting the physiological effects of stress. And the practice I mentioned, the breathing practice, is really the fundamental basic practice to help deal with stress. And most meditation practices or traditions use breathing practice. And as you know, breathing is this kind of two-way street. So when we're stressed, when we're anxious, or when we're emotional, whether it's positive emotions or negative emotions, our breathing tends to change. So think about being anxious and breathing being faster, or being angry and breathing being faster. So typically stress will increase the breathing rate and make it more shallow. So if we can slow down the breathing a little bit and make it a little bit deeper, so breathing more through the belly as opposed to through the chest, it starts up a counteracting physiological reaction in the body that counteracts the adrenaline norepinephrine effects of stress. So typically breathing will kick in the parasympathetic nervous system as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system, and it will help relax, and it also helps to have less effect of the stress on the brain. If you think about it, when you stress, it's harder to think, it's harder to remember. So being able or having some tool that can take edge off the stress in the moment can be quite valuable. And 5 minutes, 3 minutes, even 1 minute or a few moments of focusing on your breath can be a way to put a brake on a spiral of stress. And I often recommend to patients when they first start learning this to put their hand on their belly and notice their breath. And so they're also, in addition of just observing and placing attention on the breath, they also have something else. They have input from their hand as the hand is moving up and down with the breath. And that makes it a little easier to pay attention to the breath. If you'd like to do it now, you can just put your hand on your belly and just track for a moment your breath. There's no need to change the breath, just noticing the breath. And often that can slow it down a little bit. So that's one very simple way of applying mindfulness. When you have a sense that I can't think, or I'm stressed, or I'm really tense, just implementing a few moments of breathing, and you can sort of know for yourself, do I need to do a little bit more or a little bit less of just quieting and sitting down. It's almost like rebooting yourself a little bit. And this here, I want to emphasize that in addition to reducing stress, mindfulness is much more than that. That it's a practice that trains cognitive abilities to step back from our reactions. We call it meta-awareness, or ability of our mind to watch itself, ability of ourselves to watch our bodies and our emotions. And that combined with practices that foster self-compassion, as well as willingness to stay with unpleasant experiences, or willingness to put the effort to work through things that are not inherently interesting or difficult in some way. Those abilities can develop the skills of self-regulation. And when I talk about mindfulness in ADHD context, I like to talk about the mindful self-coaching voice. So oftentimes, if you grow up with ADHD, or knowing or not knowing it, there may be a lot of criticism that people are exposed to, or their own disappointment of not being able to accomplish what they set out to a lot of times. Just not being as reliable, or not being able to get things done in a timely way. That can lead to being demoralized, self-critical, and oftentimes there's this negative inner voice that can develop, and that can become habitual. Sometimes people use that negative inner voice to motivate themselves. What's wrong with you? Do this. You're so lazy. Do this. So there is a way that they sometimes that voice is useful to them, but overall it's not useful. It's not helpful, because it can really erode one's ability to feel confident and to be encouraged and to be resilient. It can actually lead to that negative voice can lead to depression and anxiety. So as we develop ability to observe through mindfulness our thoughts and feelings and our habits, these mental habits, or these ways we react to ourselves or to other people, and we often start that observation by being very open and curious about those patterns and not judging them, and just developing that witnessing stance, so you can have a greater sense of what is my inner landscape, or what are my typical reactions. Oftentimes these reactions are a little bit under the level of our awareness. They're automatic. We don't quite know that we're doing it. So the first step is developing that awareness. And once we have that awareness and a little bit of a distance from it, we can also choose to develop a more helpful inner voice, the mindful self-coaching voice, which is a voice that's encouraging, that is informed by ADHD, and can be motivating, and also is wise. So it's tapping into that inner wisdom, in a sense, that can tell you right now, I need a break. I've been focusing and really working on something, and at this point, I need a break. Or as you understand ADHD, you could have a sense that right now I need to push through. I need to complete this task. I want to go to something else that's maybe more interesting or novel, but I'm going to redirect myself and bring back. Or I can sense that urge to interrupt or to react impulsively, but yet I can tell myself, take a deeper breath, or time out, or distract yourself, so you can have a way of managing impulsivity in a different way, not just acting out of it. So that mindful self-coaching voice, self-awareness, can lead to acceptance of what's going on, but also the ability to change these patterns, to change your habits and develop new habits. I do want to emphasize the ability of mindfulness to work with emotions. In the past, when we talked about ADHD, we would focus on attention, disorganization, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and emotions were not talked about as much, or the difficulty of emotional regulation were not talked as much when diagnosed, for example, when diagnosing ADHD. That has changed in the last few years. There's more awareness that emotional regulation difficulties are quite important in ADHD. They're often more impairing than the other symptoms, and that those with ADHD can be more sensitive in terms of how they experience emotions or things that are going around them, and they also can have more difficulty regulating those emotions once those emotions are triggered. Because, as many of you may know, the difficulties with executive functions can make it difficult to downregulate intense emotion or to downregulate a reaction, a negative reaction. And that's also true sometimes of positive emotions. Somebody can be very exuberant and enthusiastic about something, and sometimes that's a wonderful quality, but at times it can lead a person to switch directions or commit to something before they have a time to reflect. So mindfulness, and we have specific practices like loving kindness practice, is to learn to be with yourself without judging yourself, and also to wish yourself well-being. And that can be very helpful in the midst of negative, very harsh, negative feelings, feeling badly about yourself, or even in the midst of sadness, or for other reasons, something that has happened to you, and there's natural sadness. Being able to be with yourself in that kind, supportive way is very important, because that can also lead to one's ability to then, modulate those feelings, allow them to be processed, and so they don't linger, they don't hang around, and being able to learn from those emotions. There is a practice called RAIN, and all these practices that I'm alluding to, them elaborated on in my book, and we'll also hopefully flesh them out a little bit more with questions. But their ability of just sitting with emotions, accepting it, and checking it out, being curious what thoughts and feelings come when I'm angry, or when I'm frustrated, or when I'm disappointed. So just learning a little bit more about that emotion, giving it space, and then to happen, and yet not reacting out of it.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. I think it's extremely intriguing and encouraging to think of our ability to change the way we think about ourselves, because I think you're right. So many people with ADHD do have a constant negative feedback loop going on. One set of questions that's come up relate to the description of mindfulness as a form of brain training, and with that, the implication and, of course, the suggestion that one needs to learn mindfulness. Can you talk a little bit about how mindfulness training is done? What is the formal, and what is you mentioned formal and informal practice? How do people go about learning mindfulness and training in mindfulness, and how is it different from other forms of meditation? Is a question that's come up as well.
Sure. So I'll first answer, how you train mindfulness, and then touch on how it's different from other meditation trainings. So mindfulness is a specific type of training that evolved over centuries or thousands of years. It's derived from Buddhist practices. And there's a set of practices that are typically used. silent sitting practice, silent walking practice, um, also mindful eating practice, and so on. These practices have been sort of put together in a program that I mentioned before called MBSR, or Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program, and brought into the clinical setting as an 8-week group training program. And that's become a model for a lot of the mindfulness, initial introductory mindfulness training programs. So what I've done through my work with my colleagues at UCLA is to take that 8-week training program and make it more user-friendly for somebody with ADHD. So the way we did it is we kept the 8-week structure. So it's typically will be a course you would take. It will be 8 weeks. Each session, weekly session, is about 2 to 2.5 hours. And during those sessions, different practices will be introduced. And then in between sessions, you're asked to practice some of it at home and also do some informal practice as much as possible. And in our program, we started out with 5 minutes of meditation. And that's in contrast to some of the other typical mindfulness training programs where you may be asked to do half an hour, 45 minutes of sitting practice or a formal practice. So we started much more gradually just to help people experience the meditation and work with the difficulties that are expected to come up. And then increasing that amount of sitting practice to 15 minutes, even half an hour. So, and different people have different ability to do that. Somebody with mostly an attentive type may be able to sit longer periods of time. Somebody with hyperactive type or combined type may have more trouble with that. So using walking practice, the mindful walking practice, which involves movement and paying attention to sensations of the feet, as you're putting your feet on the ground, kind of noting that movement and that sensation, that becomes the focal point, the place where you bring attention back to. So it's similar to just sitting and watching your breath. You have one focal point where you keep bringing attention over and over again. But in walking practice, you keep bringing attention to the sensations at your feet, but you're moving, so it can relieve some of the restlessness. That practice is often done slowly, but it can be varied in pace depending on the person's needs. So typically when you take a mindfulness class, in 8 weeks, you experience these different practices. And the initial practices are typically, and the way I like to present it is to do the practices that first train your focus. So mindful breathing or noticing the body sensations. There's a practice called body scan in which you move your attention sequentially through the body, just paying attention to different sensations there, or there may be a sense of just kind of, it's like a spotlight of attention moving through your body. And also using sound as places where you can place your attention whenever you feel particularly distracted or wrapped up in your thinking, and just learning to remove your attention to the present moment by using these anchors: breath, body, and sound. And after somebody practices that, and that's usually spend the first three weeks on that, you learn later on you have more flexibility with your awareness and your attention. There's a little bit more ability to step back and just watch what's happening in your thoughts and in your feelings. So the later sessions are to bring that awareness now into watching your thoughts going by, or watching whatever feelings may be present, and watching your reactions in communication, for example. So there's practice on mindful speaking and listening, and then applying it to daily life in terms of completing tasks, or structuring your daily routine, or just catching those barriers to doing things or to completing things, and watching avoidance, noticing what makes you avoid a certain task. So bringing that now skill of self-observation in a non-judgmental way, curious way, having some tools of how to be compassionate with yourself, those skills can be brought in to watch your habits and changing them. So that's sort of the second part of the training. So, there are different classes that are offered in mindfulness, not as much with ADHD. We're hoping to change that and offer more courses available specifically for ADHD. But one can certainly get exposed to basic mindfulness practices and, like, say, for example, using my book or other resources or reading about ADHD, they can then modify it for their own need. There are also online programs, and I'll highlight one of them called Headspace, which offers some mindfulness, very short and visually engaging practices, which I think are helpful for ADHD. So that's another resource.
Can you repeat the name? The name?
It's Headspace. I think it's headspace.com. HEAD space SPACE. Okay. And again, other practices that are in my book in the CD, which you can access also from one of my websites. Just kind of get a sample of it and have a sense if this is something that is a good, good practice for you.
Thank you. Just let me note here, some participants have posted the URL for Headspace, and it's actually getsomeheadspace.com.
Mm-hmm. Quickly, what's the difference between mindfulness and other meditation types? Besides the fact that different meditation types have different sort of cultural settings in which they developed, mindfulness practice is in addition to training some focused attention, trains more open awareness or ability to just be with experiences as they arise moment for moment. And that's important for being able to notice your thoughts and reactions as they evolve. Other types of meditations like TM, for example, are more focused on training focused, kind of laser point attention. So there's a different emphasis in what you do with attention in different styles of meditations. Some practices you'll use mantra. TM is one of them. Some Christian meditation practices or other meditation practices use mantra as a place that you come back to, where your attention comes back to. And in fact, I think that can be helpful. And you can incorporate elements of other meditation trainings into mindfulness. The main difference is that you're training awareness. You're not training an altered state that may sometimes happen with TM, for example.
A number of listeners have asked about quieting their minds. They point out that one of the traits of ADD, the ADD mind, is the sort of constant racing thoughts, and they say that they have specific problems quieting that. Wondering what your advice is on that, and also whether medication plays a role or can play a role in helping open the mind to mindfulness training. Right.
That's a very good question. First of all, there are oftentimes when people think of meditation that they think of, I have to make my mind quiet or it has to be blank, and that means that's a successful mindfulness or meditation practice. But that's really a misconception. Mindfulness is about being aware and observant or witnessing of your mind. And if your mind is quite busy, that's what you're observing. And so just noticing how many thoughts may be going on. And that can be really an important practice by itself. So it's not so much about, I have to get my mind quiet. It's more, what is my mind like at this moment? And, and in fact, the noticing how that chatter evolves, or how, what are the jumps in your thinking, or how your mind works. That's, if that's the practice, just learning to have that little bit of that space from your thinking can help you later on control your thoughts, or to choose what thoughts to strengthen and which ones not to strengthen, or focus on. So that, that by itself is a good practice. However, in practices in which you can also work with your body and relaxing the body, often if you can relax and kind of soften the body, the mind can follow. So practices that are focused on like body scan, focusing on just noticing your body, coming back to the body and relaxing it, can lead to a sense of relaxation, and with that, some less of that cognitive, chatter. With ADHD, that chatter will always be there, especially if you, person with more of that symptom, and medication can help. And so you can experiment using medication to see if your practice is easier or not. I've had people say things in both directions. Some people find that if they take a medication, they can engage in a practice more easily. Other people feel that it's just the medication sort of makes them ready to be doing things, or it's amping them a little bit, and so they find the sitting more difficult or the practice more difficult. So the good news is that with mindfulness, you can bring understanding and awareness to whatever your experience is, no matter what that experience is. So not judging it, not expecting that it has to be a certain way, and just understanding, this is sort of how my mind works. And can I, if my mind is so busy, can I still bring it back and keep exercising, bringing it back, let's say, to my breath?
One of the things you mentioned that I found fascinating was sort of what you called the informal practice of becoming aware during your daily activities, which you said was especially user-friendly for those with ADHD who can't really always sit and meditate. Can you talk some more about that informal practice and how that would work during the day as you're going through your life? How would you bring in an informal sort of self-awareness?
Sure. So first of all, you're very right. It's, the formal practice is more difficult for people, and I often recommend that a good way to get started on formal practice, or at least get a sense of what it is to sign up for a class or just a weekend workshop. So in a group, it's easier, and being guided, it's easier to learn how to engage in it. But, mindfulness practice is really meant to be part of your life and to be incorporated into daily activities, and that's where the informal practice can be so important, especially for ADHD, when you want, we talk about the point of performance. You want that awareness at the point of performance or throughout the day as you, may encounter difficulties with attention or with stress or reactivity. And so I often talk about a mnemonic that's helpful for the informal practice called STOP. And each letter means something. It's like a little step in becoming more aware, even briefly. And you can think of it as creating this mental shift in the middle of what you're doing and sort of entering mindful state. And you can enter mindful state, you can exit mindful state, and training that throughout your day. And so STOP stands for S is stop or pause. So just pausing for a second and just saying, what can I be mindful of right now? Or can I be a little bit more aware right now of what's going on? So just stopping. The letter T would be take a breath or take a few breaths. And that's a way of just dropping into the body a little bit and disengaging from busyness of your mind or busyness of doing. So stopping, taking a breath. The next letter is O, observe. And it's observing in this non-judgmental or even compassionate way what's happening for me right now, what's happening around me, or what's happening inside of me. So noticing your body, noticing if there's any areas of tension, for example, noticing your breathing, noticing your thinking or your feelings in that moment, and doing it in a way that allows you to be with it. So, oftentimes when we have thoughts or feelings, we think, I shouldn't be thinking this, I shouldn't be feeling this, what's wrong with me? So it's really learning to be with it without those judgments and with this acceptance. And then the letter P of stop. So stop, take a breath, observe, and P. The letter P is proceed. Proceed means continue with what you're doing, or with whatever was your next step, in your daily activities. But proceed with more awareness, and that awareness can also mean change the course of action. You may decide, right now I am, I'm revved up, or I'm tense, and I want to lash out. If you're angry, or impulsively say something, maybe I need to take a little bit more breathing. Maybe I need to go and kind of go for a walk, or maybe I need to kind of help my body kind of notch down a little bit from that reactivity or stress. Or maybe I need to write the email but not send it. So when you create that pause, that awareness, and that could be seconds. When you develop the practice, it really can be a very brief practice of just momentarily stopping, pausing, and taking a breath, or taking a stock of your body, observing a little bit more carefully of how am I, or what's going on, and then with that shift, perhaps make a different choice of what you would do.
So you were literally training yourself, brain training, to use the stop technique to stop and take a pause and consider before action. I think that's fascinating. And this is something you can learn, I take it from what you're saying.
Yes, and I often tell my patients to write it out, write the mnemonic on their fridge or next to their work, or write other mnemonics, or write other, have some other visual cues to help them make that shift, that pause. And sometimes just maybe a word, a word breath, or a pause, or a word, notice the body, or a no that will say, and there's another mnemonic to work with emotions, for rain, so which is to recognize your feelings, accept them, investigate, and not identify. And so that's another way of a practice that once you learn, it can become very quick, and actually that reminder can help you to tune into your feelings. So it's very much learning to, it's a shift. And the more you do it, the more you recognize when you're in that automatic, wrapped up mode of thinking, doing, versus a mode of pausing and noticing and being more aware, especially of your inner state. Because most of the time we're not that aware of our inner state. It's the inner state is driving us, is making us doing things and affect our cognitive function, but we're not fully aware of it. And we're not really we don't know how to change it or manipulate it. So part of mindfulness is being aware of that in these short, informal practices. And then, using your own sense of how you work, using the knowledge of ADHD, using maybe all the tips or ideas you pick up from other sources of how to work with ADHD, to then say, this is what I need in this moment. This is what I need to do. This is how I need to shift about how I'm going about this.
Number of people very intrigued with RAIN and would ask that whether you could repeat the meaning of that acronym.
Sure. So RAIN it's a lot like stop. It's about stopping and observing, but the letters in RAIN are a little bit different, because they emphasize the fact that it's very hard to be with emotions, and often we don't accept them. So the letter R stands for recognize. Recognize that you're having a feeling. And that might seem simple, but oftentimes we may have this feeling in the background, or we don't quite want to focus on it. We don't want to acknowledge it. So first is recognize. Then the letter A is accept. Accept. It's okay you're having this feeling. And then the next letter is I, is investigate. Investigate means check in your body. And when I think investigate, I really think of the body. investigate in your body what you're feeling. Notice if there's tension. Notice if there's a pit in the stomach, for example, or there's a different breathing. So just having more of that expanded space and awareness for your feeling. So it's not suppressed, it's not ignored, and it's also not driving us because we're not watching it. We're not completely wrapped in it and reactive out of it. There's a little bit of a stepping back. And the last letter is N, which is non-identify or not personalize, which is another reminder to, again, it's just a feeling, it's a reaction. It's a set of reactions through you that are going on in your mind and your body. Can you notice it without overly being attached to it or think it's the truth or something that you have to act on? You can learn from it. But oftentimes we're driven by feelings, and that's really true of impulsive emotions. We're driven by it. We don't always give ourselves the space to reflect on them. Sometimes the opposite happens. We don't allow ourselves to learn from our feelings, so we suppress them. So RAIN can work both ways. It's to allow you to be with your emotion in this different, non-reactive way. So recognize, accept, investigate, and not identify or not personalize.
So many people on the webinar are asking about using mindfulness techniques with children. I'd love to hear what your experience with that is and what you would say to that question.
Sure.
Lots of folks saying, that they have 12 and 14-year-olds who really could benefit from stopping and thinking before they act or are impulsive, and wondering how they can incorporate these techniques or teach their children to learn them.
Right. So my experience is mostly working with adults, but there are other people working with children, and our program has been adapted to children ages 9 to 12 with success, and other people, my colleagues at UCLA have done work with children as young as preschool, teaching them mindfulness. And so the general rules or kind of ways you can modify the training for kids, and it's to make it more brief, and in fact informal practice can be very helpful. Also more playful, more kinesthetic, meaning you can use some toys or props to help illustrate ideas or to engage children in watching their breath. For example, one common practice for little kids is to help them be more aware of their bodies and their breath is to put a little toy, like a little bear, on the top of their belly, and then telling the child, can you watch the bear going up and down, and see if they can settle a little bit with that. Another is just helping kids be non-judgmental and to observe what's going on for them when they're feeling something or when they're reacting. And that's where parents can have a great role in modeling. So if parents can understand how to do it with themselves, they can then model it to their children and teach them about, what's going on, how's your body, what are you noticing, what thoughts are you noticing? And just inquiring with that curious, non-judgmental way to help the child have that attunement themselves to what's going on. Other practices are to really help children develop a sense of how they interact with others, their eye contact, or when they're speaking, how their body language is. So there are different ways you can engage children in that. Interestingly, there's some research now with ADHD and families with ADHD. There's some preliminary research looking at mindfulness training for parents actually improve the symptoms in the child of ADHD. And I think that's an interesting finding that, our parents' stress level can, and how parents are with themselves can really impact the child. So one way to work with children is for parents to first learn it themselves. The other way is, there are other studies looking at training for both children and adults and helping them to do the training simultaneously, showing benefits also for both. I often, for kids, I would recommend doing more movement-based things, more yoga, so awareness of the body and movement is very important. doing some imagery can be helpful for children. So, thinking about, how to relax by having an imagery or image that's a safe space for the child. So I think mindfulness and imagery here can be very helpful to go together. So I hope
that's very helpful. Someone a number of people asked a question about whether there are resources you recommend, books, articles, CDs. And one person mentions a book called The Mindful Child by Susan Kaiser Greenland, which she says is very helpful. Yeah. So wondering if you had other suggestions for books, either for adults or for children.
Okay. So, yes, there are some resources. So for adults, I've created the book and a CD, so that's a resource for people. And also the Facebook website is another place where people can be engaged in news about mindfulness or tips on practice. Another book is by Dr. Mark Burton. I believe it's the ADHD Family Solution. You can look up Mark Burton, and he talks about mindfulness approaches for parents and how to work with children with ADHD. There are books specifically for children. Susan Kaiser is a colleague of mine from LA who has created the book that's wonderful. It's for young children, and I often would say, I say that the types of practices for children are actually ADHD friendly for adults as well, because they are shorter, they're more engaging, and oftentimes for those who make more trouble with these more adult type of explanations for mindfulness can actually start with maybe practicing with their child or just checking out some of the books for children and get some ideas of how to implement it in their own life. There are other books for children. If you actually go to Amazon and put Mindfulness Children, there's also one by Christopher Willard, another one just for working with children. Also, a known mindfulness teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, and his community have put together a book for children as well. So those are some main resources. There's also a magazine called mindful.org. It's a magazine that's an internet magazine, online magazine, as well as a paper version, and everything you want to know about mindfulness, practices, applications to work, relationships, health. You'll find lots of resources there. So that's actually an important place.
Mindfulness.org.
It's mindful.org.
Mindful.org. Okay. This has been so helpful and so informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those of you who want to learn more about Dr. Zylowska's techniques and join her community, which sounds wonderful, go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/mindfulnessadhd. Sounds like there's an active community there of people working with mindfulness to treat ADHD, and also to her website, lidiazylowska.com, LIDIAZYLOWSKA.com. Thank you all, and thank you again, Dr. Zylowska.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.